Welcome to the Social Priority Podcast here on Star Panda TV. I'm Star Panda, and today we talk about the conservative grooming grift. But first, I have with me an anime catgirl VTuber who talks about politics, Suris the Skeptic.
That is definitely a way to introduce me.
I try to keep it interesting.
It's accurate at the very least, but I don't think there's a but after that. I think that's it. Yeah, there's no but. There's just that. It's accurate.
Fair enough. How did you get started streaming, and what was the main issue that you cared about early on?
So that's a bit of a multifaceted thing. So I wanted to be a YouTuber talking about video games ever since I was in high school. Like, ever since I saw that as a potential career path, I made videos trying to do that, and failed miserably for a combination of reasons. One, I was very lazy when it came to editing. I refused to put any effort into editing a video. And then on top of that, I could not, for the life of me, maintain a drive to do it. Like, I would get an episode or two done on an older channel I made called State of Gaming. And then after I finished an episode or two, I'd be like, okay, cool. Now let's wait for the views to come in. And of course, none came in because they never do at that level. And then I would get very dejected about that. And I didn't realize until later that that's the part of the journey that everybody struggles with. There's very few instances where someone can say, truly and honestly, I put up a video, it went viral, and then I made it. Like, that's not a common thing on the platform. And I was a dumb kid expecting that. So later on, I made a video called I made a channel called Top Tier Scrubs, and that channel's still up if people want to see me from about 10 years ago at this point, a much younger me. And I was talking about Hearthstone on that channel, and then I realized that this is my other issue. I'm not diagnosed ADHD, but everybody who's ever spent any time with me says that I exhibit quite a lot of the symptoms. So maybe one day I'll go in and see about getting a diagnosis. But one of those symptoms is, of course, hyperfixation, which that's a symptom for a lot of neurodivergencies, to be fair. But I realized that I didn't know at the time that my enthusiasm for Hearthstone was a hyperfixation, which means that doing content on a hyperfixation was not a good idea. Because, of course, once the fixation ends, if it doesn't turn into a special interest, you have a project that's dead in the water. I did not realize that at the time. I had no way of analyzing that. I hadn't been to therapy yet. I hadn't done any of that yet. So I said, okay, well, I'll just abandon that project. It's fine. There were a bunch of other behind the scenes issues with that project too, with a podcast partner who wasn't able to hop on as often as they originally said they would. But later on, I fell down the right-wing rabbit hole a bit in terms of content creation, watching Thunderfoot, No Bullshit, Early Age, Hunter Avalon, just consuming a lot of that content, and a lot of that reinforced some of my biases because I had been dating a feminist for 4 years, and we got into fights all the time. Probably one of the reasons why we aren't together still. And these were creators that were reinforcing the points that I had been making during those conversations with that person. Things that I would later realize that oh wait, I was being dumb. I was literally factually incorrect with half the stuff I said. But through that pipeline, I also discovered YouTube atheism, which I didn't know was a thing. I grew up in a private Christian school. So to me, people were just Christian or not. That was it. And the knots were bad. I had already been kind of organically deconverting anyway. And so finding some earlier creators like GM Skeptic, Holy Kool-Aid, Godless Cranium, Vice Rhino, Apologia, stumbling on a lot of those creators ended up putting me in a situation where I was like, okay, so I'm getting these reinforced feelings again, but why? How much of this is me parroting what other people are saying? How much of this is me looking for confirmation bias? How much of this is me actually exploring versus me just sitting in the middle of comfort? And to explore that, I wanted to go ahead and make my own YouTube channel, see if I could make the content myself, see if I could make the arguments myself, and if I got into debates with people, see if I could actually figure out uh, figure my own way through them instead of relying on the note that I took from a Matt Dillahunty video 5 weeks ago or something. Um, and so I started out doing just YouTube again, and I took the avatar that I had made for the Top Tier Scrubs channel, that was me as Thrall from World of Warcraft, and used that as my avatar for the channel. So like the aesthetic for the avatar all comes from that. Um, and I started doing videos, and the more, like, now we're going to compress 5 years of time down as much as I can.
Mhm.
Started doing a lot of content, all edited content, and then the closer and closer I got to this looking like a thing I could do full time, I got fired from my job at Aldi for not being empathetic enough. That was the reason given on my firing. So then I went, okay, that's a fire under my ass. I need to go ahead and start going and treating this like a full-time thing. How do I do that? Well, if I work streaming into my content, that will help. Like, I'll do 2 edited videos and 3 streams a week. And that later turned into 2 edited videos and 5 streams. And then it turned into no edited videos and all streams. And then it turned into streaming all the time and then taking the portions of the stream that were as topical as an edited video that I would have made previously and just making that the video on the channel. And then that turned into, well, if I'm already doing this, I should probably be streaming on a different platform so that I have a safety net. Like, if YouTube hits me with demonetization one day, I'd still have Twitch. And if Twitch suspends me one day, I'd still have YouTube. So then I took that thing I was already doing and moved it over to Twitch. And I think that's as compressed as I can take that entire journey.
Yeah, I feel like I'm actually gonna go the opposite way because I'm considering getting on not to YouTube, but Twitch and streaming while I do these. But like I'm starting out with like just editing down whatever happens here, you know.
Yeah.
So I heard that your viewers urged you to transition into an anime cat girl. Is that evidence of the woke mob forcing men to be girls?
Yes, actually, it is 110%. No, I'm kidding. It's not. I am going to say one thing real quick because I am in the middle of a subathon. We just
Sure.
got a really generous dono in, so I'm going to be adding 200 minutes to my timer. Only butting that in right now because if I don't add that now, that timer might run down during the course of the interview, and then everybody's going to be like, "Wait, is it over?" So I'm just taking care of that right now. So basically, what ended up happening was I showcased a couple of pieces of fan art on a video 4 years ago, and that led to people going, "Oh, I guess if he's going to show his fan art in the beginning of videos, maybe he'll show my fan art in the beginning of videos." So people started submitting more and more fan art, and then if you've ever had a thing happen once and it kind of signals to everybody that they should also do that thing, like you know that experiment where like one guy sitting in the middle of an elevator and then the entirety of the elevator turns to the left, and then the one guy who's not part of the social experiment also ends up turning to the left because that's what everybody else is doing.
Mm-hmm.
I have a feeling that kind of happened on the fan art front, because not with the making of fan art, because that's just a thing that happens sometimes with creators, but a piece was made by a user named Chachinus. And I don't know Chachinus's gender. This is before we had like any infrastructure for the Discord server. It just kind of existed because I figured it needed to. Um, and Chachinus made this piece of fan art of my character as a girl. And the unique thing about it was this was like a heavily detailed, like hyper rendered. This is something that I would pay like $100 for, not even with a commercial license, if I were buying it now as part of like stuff I would put on my channel. It was really, really high quality. And I showed that in a video, and I guess because that fan art was so well made, it was so high quality, people started taking that fan art as inspiration to make more. And not just more fan art of my character, but specifically gender bent fan art of my character. After a while, it just became the norm. We're like, 10% of the fan art was gender bent. Then 20% of the fan art was gender bent. Then 30, then 40, up until the point where it was almost a half and half split. And then the cat ears got added on. Another person named Jack the Vulture, who is somebody I have since commissioned. But Jack the Vulture took the fan art from Chichinas, that idea, and started Nekoizing it. Put tail on it, put cat girl ears on it. And it was another one of those, like, this piece is really good. I asked Jack the Vulture, hey, can I use this in thumbnails every now and again for the channel? Can I work this into the channel at some point? He said yes. And so we started doing that. And I guess that just kind of reinforced that, oh, that's the direction the channel's going. At the time, I had moved away from using my cartoon avatar to just using my face all the time, which I was already doing on streams anyway. I would do like edited videos, get the avatar, streams, get the face. I had moved for the avatar videos. I had been using an animated one where I would have to put like everything into Adobe Lip Sync and have it generate lip sync for the character. But I abandoned that because that just took way too long. Like, that made every video a 9-hour editing session. And this had become my full-time job at this point. I couldn't do releasing a video every day with 9 hours editing alone for every video, not counting the time it took to record the video, not counting the time it took to research. So we moved into the live format, but people said that they missed the avatar videos. So I said, okay, I can get you the avatar videos back, but it's not going to be what you wanted. So I went on to Fiverr because I didn't know how to commission this before. I had a lot of artists in my community, but I didn't know which of them knew how to make VTuber models. That wasn't a thing I knew. I didn't even know how the dang things worked. So I go on to Fiverr and I find a person who was reasonably priced at the time. I've since got them to raise their prices, thankfully. But named Remixon. And contacted Remixon and said, hey, can you do a waist up budget avatar of my character? And can you use these as the reference photos? So I included one photo of my character as it existed on the channel in the beginning, and then everything else was fan art. I just threw like 5 pieces of fan art at her and said, can you use these to construct the model? And she said, okay. About a month time later, model is done. I don't announce to my stream at all that I'm going to be using the model. The most I had done was showed like the work in progress sketch, and not even in a recorded session. So nobody on YouTube knew this was even happening. And one day I'm just doing a League of Legends stream, and I test out the model by just turning it on. No context for the stream, no nothing. And people really liked the model. And then, of course, more fan art started coming in of it. And so it's just like this cycle where like my community would do a thing in fan art that would get adopted into channel lore, and then after that got adopted into channel lore, that fan art would turn into official things for the channel. So like when I got my 3D model artist Bonbon, there was a piece of fan art dropped of a witch Suris, and October was coming up anyway, and it was a really, really, really good design from a user named Mr. Stopheles. So we took that design, I threw it at Bonbon and said, I'm just going to do the thing that I've been doing this whole time. This is fan art that was submitted of this. Can you make this as a model with the original artist's permission? Same thing with the Autumn model that Remixon made for my character. There was a user named Taylor Allen. Submitted an Autumn design for my character. I threw that at Remixon and said, hey, I got the original artist's permission. How much do I have to pay you for you to turn this into a working, breathing model for me to use? And that's kind of been a running theme a lot. People will submit outfits that look really, really good. And if I've got the money, I'm just like, hey, this is an excuse to give my artist more money. I'm going to do that right now. So that's the reason, in short, that the channel ended up going into having the Hat Girl avatar thing. Bonus points, having the avatar actually made me discover something about my gender, and that was that I was gender apathetic. Like the first couple of times using the model, I felt kind of weird, and then like as I used it longer, I realized, wait a minute, I don't think I actually care about how I look in the mirror. Like, I'm not experiencing any dysphoria. I'm not experiencing euphoria looking at my model. Even thinking of myself as that. Maybe I'm just apathetic to my gender entirely. And so that was a neat thing to discover through it. That was more of a side effect than anything.
Did you realize the feeling of that, or did you look up like what it could be?
It
You know
was
what I
more
mean?
just it was more just realizing the feeling of it.
Hmm.
So I had a similar feeling when I discovered I was demisexual, but that one was me looking it up, figuring out like this is how I feel. What does this mean? The demisexuality one was a little more TMI. That is entirely up to you on whether or not I say like how that was discovered.
That's up to you how much you want to share.
Basically, early with my not my last relationship because I'm polyamorous, so that term is a weird one to use. So my last polycule, before it was a polycule, me and my partner at the time, we went to a swingers party, and I realized something there. There was another couple that we knew, and I was very attracted to the female half of that particular couple. And I didn't know like why, because to me it was just kind of an automatic thing. Like this is how your brain works. But I realized something. Despite being in a house with 30 plus people, half of which I should have wanted to be with, I didn't. It wasn't that like they were unattractive. It was that I wasn't attracted to any of them. Like I just couldn't muster that feeling. They were no different than like the other guys in the room, and I'm straight, so that's not a feeling of attraction that I would have anyway. And the feeling was the exact same between the guys and the girls that I didn't know. And I didn't know how to process that, so I talked it over with my partner after the swingers party, and they said, "Well, here's this thing," and they showed me a couple articles on demisexuality, and said, and granted, I was not super keen on even accepting the label for myself because this is back when I was very like anti SJW. It's why we got into fights as much as we did, but I still like looked at that and went, "That describes me." That is of like I looked at demisexuality like, hey, you have to have an attraction not only to the person's personality, but like your brain needs to see them as a friend, as safe, as this and that, and then they can move into that category, and that supersedes physical descriptors for your brain. I'm just like looking at that, going, no, that describes me. That makes sense. Um, so like with the gender apathy, it was more just like I was operating with the model, going, I wouldn't mind, but I also wouldn't care either way. With the demisexuality, it was the way you described, like going and looking it up and saying like, hey, what describes the feeling I'm feeling right now?
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So, yeah, your channel seems very like artist driven. That's a really cool thing that you built there.
The artist driven nature of the channel was not something baked into it when I started. That's a thing that organically happened.
Right.
And I'm perfectly okay with that being the case. The only thing that's not okay with it sometimes is my wallet. But that is fine too. In a world where I had infinite money, I would probably be taking a lot more of my fan artists just under wing and going, "Do you need job? Here is job." But I don't have that kind of money, unfortunately, but would that I did.
God, if only. So we're gonna talk about conservative grooming grift, and I think I want to start out with how this whole discourse has started since the 80s, around the Reagan era and like just the apathy surrounding the problems that the gay community, like the LGBT, have been going through with the HIV and the AIDS epidemic. And like we have something similar going on now. People probably have heard of it. With monkeypox, even though it's not an STI or STD. And it's pretty ridiculous how far it's gotten, even though like we know that it's related to smallpox and all that. But yeah, what has been your, I guess, thoughts on how this whole groomer discourse has resurged from the 80s?
So I have a lot of thoughts on it. The first one is it's a giant belt of hypocrisy.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, your more conservative red states are the ones that have more of a history with issues where child marriage is concerned, and that is definitionally a style of grooming. But
Right.
that hypocrisy aside, this is literally just the discourse that people who are on more liberal, more left-leaning side of politics. This is just what we've been told we do with the word Nazi. Conservatives do with the word groomer what we've been told we do with the word Nazi. You say everything you don't like is a Nazi. You say everyone you don't like is a Nazi. And we're watching them do the exact same thing with the word groomer. Everybody who says something you don't like on the internet is a groomer, right?
I would say that we're more accurate with the Nazi description, except for those like some of the liberal kind of wing of the left.
I'd say that I very often hesitate to use the word Nazi as a descriptor of a person.
Mm-hmm.
I'm perfectly fine using Nazis as a descriptor of an ideology. Like if somebody starts bringing in Jewish question stuff, I will immediately go like, "That's a Nazi thing."
Yeah.
You might not know that's a Nazi thing, but that's a Nazi thing. Whereas if somebody puts like 1488 in their screen name, I'll just be like, "That person is a Nazi." I'm sorry. Like, you don't put the 14 words and then Heil Hitler at the end of your username without being some flavor.
Jesus.
What's up?
No, I just said Jesus.
But with the grooming discourse specifically, what I have noticed is that this is actually coming from a guy named Chris Rufo. Not completely, but he's where a primary chunk of this is coming from.
Right.
For those who don't know, Chris Rufo is the guy who popularized the hatred for CRT. He's the one who gathered a bunch of the documents that got used by Ben Shapiro and Matt Walsh, Michael Knowles. Like, he's the one who gathered a lot of that stuff together and posted it on Twitter to be used functionally as a psyop for demonizing critical race theory in the United States. The reason that every conversation about racism dials to CRT in some way, that's Chris Rufo. That's his fault. And he's been very public about the fact that he did that, and that was completely and totally on purpose. The groomer discourse is no different, though he didn't start it, he's piggybacking off of that. So the groomer discourse is just the exact same thing. As opposed to labeling all talks about racism as CRT, you label all talks about LGBTQ stuff as grooming, because naturally, who needs to be educated the most, generally speaking, in terms of sheer numbers? Children. So who needs to be educated on LGBTQ stuff the most so that they don't develop bigotries early on? Children. So now that we're talking to children about LGBTQ stuff, it gets called grooming, and by a very loose, very fucked up version of the definition, technically it is, but so is teaching math by that same very loose definition. Like, you're grooming a child into a mathematician, you're grooming a child into being a statistician. Like, teaching is technically grooming by the loose definition that gets used by people in this discourse. But that kind of bridges into the next point about Chris Rufo. Rufo has gone on record to say that He was successful with CRT demonizing it, especially in the education system. So now he is going after teachers and LGBTQ things. So now not only can a teacher get lambasted on social media for talking about race stuff, and then they get to go, aha, see, look, the CRT is really happening in the schools. Now, when a teacher is talking about LGBTQ stuff, even if it's just a teacher goes, yes, I have a wife, and she happens to present female, like even if it's something like that, people will go, well, that's none of the kids' damn business, and it was none of your damn business to tell them, despite the fact that that would be considered perfectly fucking normal for a guy to say he has a wife at home. Like that's completely normal and accepted within teaching spaces.
Right.
But a unique label gets ascribed to it when it's LGBTQ things. Um, I've had I have conservative friends of mine, and a conversation that I had, not so much about like the groomer stuff, but about normalization of LGBTQ things where kids are concerned. When I've had the conversation that has gone, they go, "Here's my position. I don't think you should show like a gay kiss to kids too young. They don't need to see that." And then I go, well, "What about Snow White? What about cis kisses? What about, guys and girls who are kissing?" And bear in mind, I'm functionally a cis white guy who's straight saying this. I'm not in that group advocating for myself. I'm like literally going in, going, no, 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 no. I am you, and this is how I see this. If there's no difference between a guy and a girl kissing, if there's no problem with that, if you can show that to a kid at 6 or 7, both out in the open and also just like in cartoons, what's the problem with a guy and a guy, or a girl and a girl, or God forbid, two people who are super androgynous and there's no way to tell? Like, like the writers go, I'm going to write an NB without calling it an NB, and we're going to call the show Steven Universe. Um, so like, I try to explain, I'm like, look, if we can show this one way, why can't we show it another? And that's usually where you get a bunch of haywire, right? It doesn't really go much further than that in the conversation, because you'll usually hear like, it's different. Well, how is it different? Well, they can breed. Oh, so we're talking about, the birds and the bees to kids at 6 years old now? No. Okay, then why does the breeding matter? Um,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
but because this, and I don't want to call it a grift, because there's people who legitimately believe this. Because this idea that talking about LGBTQ stuff in any form or fashion, despite it being functionally identical to talking about straight relationships to kids, is grooming, we're going to see people losing their jobs over this, especially in teaching areas. That's a thing Chris Rufo's trying to make happen anyway, and he was successful with CRT, so there's no reason to believe he won't be successful here. I think that the entire discourse is bullshit. It is borderline projection based on statistics,
Right.
but unfortunately, just like with the CRT stuff, it has been and is going to continue to be effective, because the most vulnerable people in our population are children. So when you talk about anything that involves children, you will naturally get knee-jerk reactions from people all the time. If you call somebody a groomer, they're going to be seen as demonized immediately, and for good reason, because when we usually use the word groomer, we're trying to talk about somebody who is trying to exploit a child. We're trying to find somebody who's finding like a loophole to exploit a child as soon as they get of age. That's what grooming is supposed to mean. But when they use this loose definition, you have someone like Matt Walsh saying groomer loosely, and then you have a parent listening to Matt Walsh who is hearing groomer, the term that is basically a predator. And that's by design. And it sucks.
Do you think they are succeeding in the same way that they succeeded in demonizing CRT?
Yes. I believe they will succeed the exact same way. Now, here's the thing. Whether or not that success will stay is another question. I don't think it will stick, but I think that the goal is to anger a group of people, right? The goal is to anger a group of people who are prone to knee-jerk reactions and anger. And if that is the goal, which I believe it is, that goal is going to be successful because it is already proving to be successful.
Right.
And that sucks. But it's a good thing to look at it and recognize that, okay, yes, this is a thing they are succeeding at. Because if you don't recognize where people you disagree with are succeeding, you'll have zero ability to argue with them. Because in your brain, everything works perfectly. Everything's going to go work out okay. Historically, things tend to, move towards progressivism more often than not. But there's a couple of things that I've heard during this discourse, not just this one, but any discourse that has to deal with progressivism versus conservatism, is that this is like the last gasp of conservatism. This is the last gasp they're doing. And I don't know, maybe it's the time that I spent in a Christian private school talking about the upcoming apocalypse. But there's only so many last gasps conservatism can have before I start going, somebody is crying wolf here. This isn't a last gasp. This is just the next bastion they're using. There's no last gasping happening here.
I think a better analogy for it might be more like a crossroads that we're at.
Mm-hmm.
Although the same crossroads happened in the 80s, so I don't know if that's the perfect analogy, but
I mean, the crossroad happening in the 80s, though, what was the end result of it was just more normalization in media. And that was about as far as it got. And then that normalization in media ended up being the ball rolling that allowed it to be easier to argue in the Supreme Court that, when we had Obergefell, right?
Mm-hmm.
It became easier to have that conversation with that normalization. There were still idiots on the internet who were mad about that. Like freaking, if you remember Boogie's response to when gay marriage got legalized, where he went like, I think it's a good thing, but I think it should have happened in about 10 years, not this soon. And you hear that, you just go, when the hell is soon enough, when people have been having to use adoption agencies to legally bind themselves together so that they can gain the same benefits that a married couple would? How is it not soon enough now when people are already resorting to this now? How is soon enough not 30 years ago? But so what happened in the 80s with that entire thing, like we started seeing only, what was it, 5? No, 3. Only about 3 years ago did California lower the penalties on transmitting HIV to be, it went from like a felony to a misdemeanor. And a lot of people got angry about that, but that is a direct result of Reagan era policies that led to that felony charge in the first place. And the reason that it was a good thing that ended up dialing back was people literally just weren't getting themselves tested in California. Because if you got tested and then knew you had HIV and then spread it, you were now liable for a felony. But if you never knew, you never could be held accountable for it because you had plausible deniability. So the fact that just recently, like within the last 3 years, was a policy change so that people would, it would be more normalized to get tested for STDs, STIs, because you didn't have a criminal offense ahead of you if something fucked up. I think that much like with that, we're going to see this grooming nonsense lead to a bunch of really restrictive policies in the now, and then we're going to watch a snowball effect of things getting better about 30 years from now. And I hate that that's the case because I don't want it to be the case. But there's a handful of differences between then and now that have to be considered. For one, we're in the age of the internet. We don't just have the politicians and pundits on screen normalizing what our media and Overton window are. We have randos on the internet, on forums, on chan boards, on Discord servers, and then pundit does not just mean person who goes on CNN and talks about the politics that have happened recently. Pundit now just means a person who turns on their TikTok one day and bitches about liberals. Like that's still a pundit now. And that's a person who will get views. So our environment is so different. It's so much easier now to radicalize people through media, and more people can do it, that there's no way I don't see this being a problem or as successful as the anti-HIV stuff that the Reagan administration tried to do that fucked over people for so long. We've got a much more hotbed environment now, but because we've got that environment on both sides, maybe the time frame for getting things fixed will be shorter. I hope. We had a wave of anti-SJW stuff, and then we had a wave of progressive stuff. After 2017, and now I think the pendulum's moving to where there's another wave of anti-SJW stuff that's coming. Maybe that's going to affect things. Who knows? There's no way to tell the future, but I do think that it is going to be a little bit like the Reagan era policies that led to shit like what's in California, because we're already seeing those conversations happening with politicians like Ted Cruz and Marjorie Taylor Greene right now.
Yeah. Yeah, like with the what was it? The Texas GOP platform. That whole shitstorm is a very good like marker of where they're trying to take it.
Like the Texas GOP platform literally started making it, abundantly clear that the log cabin party within them was no longer welcome to do anything for like the longest time.
Right.
If you're familiar with like the Republican log cabin people, like that was the gay advocacy from within the Republican Party, and so many of their leaders ended up just up and quitting because they were so thoroughly disenfranchised by their own party. There was nothing left for them, and this creates a compounding problem, because as you get people who have Republican economic policies, which disproportionately hurt people in minority groups by and large anyway, when you have people who advocate for that all the time, they get thoroughly disenfranchised from the Republican Party. The Democratic Party will very readily accept them into its ranks, typically, because then they've got a story to sell. His party went so extreme. We're the party of moderation. We will bring them in. We will be the party of both sides. Like, they do that shit. And now we've got a Democratic Party that slowly shifts more to the right because it is subsuming people who are fall off and castaway from a further and further shifting right Republican Party. So no, like when you bring up the stuff that the GOP did in Texas with their platform, that's the end result I see from that. And that makes America's Overton window shift more to the right. And that's a scary thought. Like, we already have a Democratic Party that is very moderate. They're not very left-wing by comparison to other countries.
And they're pretty hostile to left policies.
Yeah, if you have like unless you are a celebrity within the party, bringing in like a thoroughly socialist policy tends to get you hit very, very badly. Because, and when I say socialist policy, I'm not meaning like, let's talk about healthcare for everybody. That is a socialist style policy because that has to do more with group ownership. But I'm talking like, if somebody goes in and says, hey, Disney's a monopoly, maybe that's a company that should be democratically owned and also broken up a bit. The Disney lobby's going to come in and go, we painted your childhood. Don't you love us? We painted the childhood of your children. Don't you love us? Don't you also love this $20,000 donation our lobbying firm has sent to your PAC? Didn't you like that? You should lobby with us. Like, you should help us. Like, I don't. It's a fustercluck.
Yeah, definitely. So this is a lot of shit that's happening, obviously. But like, I want to focus in on a little bit of the hypocrisy that's happening. Like with, I think Tennessee just recently passed a law. Did they pass it? I don't remember. But it was about like redefining marriage, and essentially they didn't put an age limit on it.
So it was not redefining marriage. What that law was creating a separate marriage category. The idea that was presented was that the institution of government-sanctioned marriage, as it existed in Tennessee, had been soiled by gay people being able to be married. So there needed to be a new special kind of marriage that only straight couples could get. So it didn't redefine it. It was more creating a brand new one and letting the old one be in its own category, which is just as bad. It's equally stupid.
Right.
But yes, the original bill did not provide an age requirement for marriage. And when one of the people who it was either one of the people who co-signed the bill or one of the people who wrote it, when asked about that, he basically gave the "that's a feature, not a bug" response.
Jesus.
But whether or not that is specifically passed, I haven't checked into. I covered it when it was dropped on the House floor, but I don't know if that's actually gone through yet, personally, and I don't want to speak out of my butt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've seen that a lot of these conservative states. I think with the exception of, I think it was Pennsylvania. I don't know how many more it could be, but I know that a majority of them that have child marriage legalized are out there and conservative and all that. I think that's a real problem that they should probably fix before calling other people groomers. But
Well,
yeah,
usually the response given to maybe we should get rid of child marriage in the United States, um, they'll go like, "Well, it's only in exceptional circumstances." Can you name me the exceptional circumstance where a 12-year-old should be married to an adult? Can you name me the exceptional circumstance where that's okay? Because I can't. Um, but I do think that's like I don't know which state it was where like there was a thin Republican margin that kept their child marriage stuff. Um, and I don't want to like throw a state out because I could just go like it's Alabama and then people would believe me and then one person would fact check me and realize that I talked out of my butt. And that's the problem with misinformation online, by the way. If you trust a streamer or a YouTuber to generally tell the truth, and then they say something wrong and you don't fact check them because of the previous record, suddenly you're parroting wrong things and now you're part of the problem. Uh,
yeah, I
so
will say, anyone who's listening, please go back and look stuff up on your own. Like, try to find some really good sources that you trust and look those up.
so looking at the marriage facts on this, because I do have this pulled up now. In the United
Mhm.
States, about 200,000 minors have been married between 2000 and 2015. Of the 200,000, 67% of them were 17, 29% were 16, 4% were 15, and 1% were 14 or under. There were 51 cases exactly of 13-year-olds getting married, and 6 cases exactly of 12-year-olds getting married. And that's all according to the Pew Research Center. It's more common in southern United States, which that's why that thing I said would have been more believable.
Right.
Um, West Virginia, Florida, Texas, Tennessee, Arkansas, and North Carolina. California and Nevada also have high incidences of child marriage as well. In 2010, Idaho had a case of a 65-year-old man marrying a 17-year-old girl. In Alabama, there was a case of a 74-year-old man marrying a 14-year-old girl.
Oh God.
And in Tennessee, 3 10-year-old girls married men ages 24, 25, and 37, respectfully. The youngest boy to marry was an 11-year-old who married a 27-year-old woman in Tennessee. So this is a problem that goes both ways. Um, California has no minimum age when all exemptions are taken into account. It has a population of 39 million people, so that's a lot. Idaho has no minimum wage when its exceptions are taken into account. The
Minimum
exceptions
age.
for no minimum age. Yeah, no minimum age. There's all of these say when all exemptions are taken into account, and bear in mind there's a lot of exemptions that vary state by state. But like Rhode Island allows for it, Oklahoma does, New Mexico does, Mississippi, Michigan, Massachusetts, Washington, West Virginia, and Wyoming seem to be the ones that do not have a minimum age of marriage, though there are criterion you have to meet, like parental consent and stuff like that. Not that that makes it okay. It doesn't. But
I don't even think parents should weigh in on that. I don't think marrying your kids away is a good thing.
look, I may be a huge fan of Ranma One Half, but it does not mean that I think Ranma Sao Tome's situation should be emulated by other people. Have you ever watched that show?
I haven't. I should though.
So the general premise is that his dad, Gendo Saotome, um, is a bit of a we'll call him a used car salesman martial artist.
Oh.
Um, he's very, very good at bullshitting you, but he's also very good at fighting. That's like those are his two big things. And a thing that he would do to pay for the family's expenses going forward is he would agree with other adults that his son, Ranma Saotome, would be married off to their young daughter when they come of age. He would promise marriage. The problem is he kept doing it to multiple different people and kept forgetting like who all he had married his son off to when he was a minor.
Wow.
So by the time Ranma's about 16, all of these people start seeking him out, and they are all increasing levels of violent. But all of them start seeking him out, going, okay, question. We're supposed to be married. What are you doing with this person over here? And the conversation always has to be like, well, I'm betrothed to them too. And that one over there, and that one over there, and that one over there. My dad basically sold me to a bunch of people, and I don't know how to feel about it.
Yeah, that definitely sounds like an interesting anime that I should probably watch at some point.
Sarah Chigarita said with Shampoo, Shampoo was an accident. Shampoo was, Ranma has the ability to turn between guy and girl. Ranma fights Shampoo as a girl because he does something that dishonors her, and it's in the middle of an Amazonist village. So like they have to fight. It's the rules. And they fight. And the rule is that like if Shampoo is beaten by another woman, she has to hunt them down and kill them to get to get herself back into her village. Otherwise, she's exiled for life. And then when Ranma transforms into a guy at the end of the first season, Shampoo sees that he's a guy, and the rules for the village are if a girl beats you in combat, you have to kill them to get your honor back. But if a guy beats you in combat, you have to marry them. So now she like has an existential crisis and becomes one of the people that is trying to marry Ranma as things go forward. Again, after spending an entire season trying to kill him. So, it's an interesting anime. It's a comedy, but it's got a fair bit of drama too. Gotcha. It's fun.
Yeah, you've definitely sold me on it, honestly. But yeah, so let's go ahead and move on to how this groomer discourse is harming the actual victims. So I'm not sure how to go about this one. I have heard, I think of a lot of teachers having like a ton of issues trying to help their own kids like feel safe and stuff like that, or themselves feeling safe at the school. Let's see, I know that there was that one I think 10-year-old who had gotten pregnant and got an abortion.
Had to go across state lines for it.
Yeah, and the only reason it became an issue of how she got pregnant was when they were trying to get like a reason to be against the abortion or something, or like
So like with that situation, Fox News didn't start reporting onto it until they were able to call the rapist an immigrant, and that kind of struck me as weird. And like, it wasn't bad enough that he was a child rapist. You couldn't make like any news articles on this that were substantial up until the point where you could talk about his immigrancy status. What the heck?
Yeah, why does that make it bad that he
like it was
might be an immigrant? Like, it doesn't make it less or more wrong that he did it.
Yeah, it was already bad to begin with, and then
Yeah.
you did that. Um, so in that situation, the thing that struck me as big, and there's a lot of aspects to this, but in that situation specifically, the thing that struck me was the attorney general trying to get a mob against the doctor who performed the abortion. That really, really struck me as like really shitty. And then, of course, Fox News going, yeah, 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 we should definitely prosecute her. Definitely. No, she deserves it. She needs to lose her license. Not because she did an abortion for a 10-year-old. No, no, because let's read through my notes here. She didn't properly report this, despite the fact that this being public information means that it was pro- properly reported first. Um, we're just gonna hope that our audience's cognitive dissonance kicks in on that one. Um, so like, there's that situation, but there's another angle of this as well that's really, really screwed up. So we noticed this a lot with the QAnon movement, right?
Mm-hmm.
So everybody can agree that the most vulnerable people in our country are almost always going to be children. Few steps left of that, you've got minority groups. Few steps left of that, you've got women, and then you keep on. You can throw everybody into a spectrum of vulnerability, but typically the most vulnerable are going to be those who cannot properly advocate for themselves, nor do they know how to, and that's usually going to be children. So we all have an innate understanding that kids need to be protected. 110%. We
Right.
know that. So then we look at QAnon. What was the claim, the biggest claim QAnon put forward? Stuff like Pizzagate.
Mm-hmm.
Like the idea that, there's a group of evil Democrats who are trying to suck the adrenochrome out of your kids. And despite the fact that you didn't know how to pronounce that word until just now, you're angry about it because your kids are in danger. And you need to do something about it by waiting for the next Q post on 4chan dot kill me.
Jesus.
So it ties in. It's very easy to grab that part of you that goes, think of the children, and everybody wants to feel like they're part of protecting kids. We all want to feel like we're doing our part to protect minors in our community so that they're not getting harmed, because it's our job to raise them up so that they can keep society going with as little trauma as possible, like make a better world for the people who are coming after you. So, in our attempts to make that world, we get stuff like Q, where that innate good feeling for people gets weaponized. But then here's the problem: if you have 20,000 people looking for a basement for a pizza joint that doesn't exist, like the pizza joint's real, but the basement's not there, and they're all hung up on this, and they want to do something about child predators, they're not doing anything about child predators. And in fact, they're creating an environment where so many people are focused on that thing that doesn't matter, that looks like it's about child predators. Actual predatory behavior gets swapped under the rug. Like, how many people want to talk about, the Republican Party in various states voting to keep child marriage, when they could instead talk about the Democrats trying to suck adrenochrome out of kids?
Right.
Like, you materially are making the world worse by having this performative outrage instead of, doing something with it. Like, it's okay to be mad, but spending so much of your time and energy brain rotting yourself instead of looking at where the problems are actually happening, the thing that you actually care about. Because it's not like, this isn't a starving children in Africa problem. This is you want to stop child predators. Look at this institution that is allowing child predators to propagate. What can we do about this? And you're worried about the fake one.
Yeah, I think there's like a sort of cognitive dissonance with the two definitions that we would ascribe to Groomer at this point. Um, like they try to use Groomer in the correct way, but when they talk about specific people being groomers, it's usually just them talking about how they are either gay or trans or something. And
Yeah.
the fact that they do that, um, it I guess, like you said, it sweeps all the actual grooming under the rug that is done by, like, let's take Matt Gates for instance. um, and that is weird though, like that they'll call so many people groomers, but like they don't say anything about Matt Gates, who is on
Mhm.
their side of the aisle.
Or
It,
they'll have like you'll have Marjorie Taylor Greene bringing Milo Yiannopoulos
right.
into her fold because he's an ex-gay, he likes conversion therapy, he's been canceled on the internet, and that makes him really marketable. And then you talk about his views on, uh, things having to do with child predator stuff, and you find this whole wealth of stuff about Milo and his views on that, and it's really creepy. But then you don't end up bringing that up much because now you've got, well, what about him being canceled on the internet? Don't we need him for our movement? Let's just ignore the child predator stuff. Let's ignore his opinions on that so that we can continue keeping him here for our movement.
Right.
And that's more than a little gross to me, but it's also like when you brought up Matt Gates, it's a thing that we see a lot.
um
Interrupted by Carp says Groomer is just the new communist. I mean, yeah, it's the Red Scare thing all over again.
Essentially, yeah.
You build your list of groomers, but the reason it works out so much better now is back then you had a handful of people spearheading the campaign, and we got to have the anti-McCarthy moment, at long last have you no sense of decency left. But we don't get to have that moment with random people making, Twitter threads, right?
And I
Like that
think
moment doesn't work anymore.
I think the internet makes it even worse because like so many more people can participate in that, and
Oh
everyone
yeah.
can see it.
And it's super easy to weaponize the internet against somebody. Like if you're familiar with Kiwi Farms,
Hmm.
like the minute that I made the video about like my political journey that led me to where I am right now, you bet your ass that video got thrown up onto Kiwi Farms, and every second of it got scrutinized by a bunch of basement dwellers in their forums. And now that I've said this, of course, that's going to end up on there too. That's just how that is. Like I've got to be constantly aware, and anybody on the internet has to be constantly aware of like these sites where nobody who cares about doing anything good happens to be, but it's a bunch of people who think they're doing good. Like, hey, all of my friends hate SJW woke cucks. Look at what I'm doing to own the SJW woke cuck. Um, and it's so easy to weaponize groups now with the internet. We didn't even use the term, like by and large, stochastic terrorism until it became so easy to be a shock jock online.
I guess to wrap up the topic, how do you think we can solve these issues? Like, I know there isn't going to be like one right answer, but like, I feel
Yeah,
like there has to be something we can do about like the next CRT groomer discourse, or like making it known that victims are out there and this groomer discourse is harming them and stuff like that, you know?
so the best thing you can do generally, like the best inoculant to misinformation is always and has always been education. Um the problem is, how do we get that education into the hands of the people who need it? So the best advice I can give to help, if you've got a family member who is falling into this, who is, and this goes for QAnon, this goes for the anti-CRT stuff, this goes for any of this nonsense. If you've got a family member who's falling into it or a best friend who's falling into it, just have a conversation with them like, "Hey, why do you think that?" Don't like sit down and grill them and accuse them. Use the, Socratic method. Um why do you believe the thing that you believe? Why does that appeal for you? How did you come to start believing that? Like what you'll find with individual people usually is the scariest question to ask yourself is always why. We as human beings adopt beliefs like they're new sets of underpants. we are not good at identifying how we got these sets of underpants. All we know is we're currently wearing them, and by God, they're comfy. So, sitting down with people you care about, hey, I see you believe this thing. Uh, why? Like, don't even say that thing is harmful or that thing harms me or that thing offends me. That causes a backfire effect. Just ask why, because that's a question as much for them, for you, as it is for themselves. Get in the habit of doing that. You don't have to make like a grand narrative on Facebook or on Twitter. This is a thing that can be done best at individual levels, because with the way online communities work, people get very insular very quickly, and it's how algorithms work. This is why we have when you go on Twitter, there's Sonic the Hedgehog Twitter, there's anime Twitter, there's trans Twitter, there's black Twitter. There's like the reason all that exists is YouTube and Twitter and multiple different social media organizations. Their algorithms are built to keep you engaged. So if you care about Sonic stuff, or if you care about issues in the black community, or you care about issues in the trans community, you are more likely to see that stuff online, for better or worse, because that's how our computer algorithms work.
Right.
But if the things you're engaging with are more likely to be, confrontational, you're more likely to get into fights with people. The algorithm sees that and it says, "Oh, you want to do this more," because it doesn't see that you're fighting, it just sees that you're engaging. The algorithms are going to keep you engaging with people for as long as they can, which means a combination of directing you to a group of people who share your beliefs and then directing you to people who don't have your beliefs, because you'll interact with the people who share your beliefs a lot and you'll interact with the people who hate you a lot, but you're not going to be interacting with knitting Twitter anymore. You're not going to be interacting with, cooking Twitter anymore. Same with YouTube, Facebook to another degree. Like, all of these areas, they have a tendency to put us in bubbles, because when we are in bubbles, it's very easy to make us engage more. Because of that tendency, you can't do any broad sweeping things to fix a person's faulty ideology, because an algorithm has already put them in a bubble where if they see it, it's going to be surrounded by a bunch of people who disagree with it and are going to have a bunch of short, quippy, and wrong reasons to disallow what you're saying. But if you sit down with someone you care about on an individual level, hey, mom, I see that you really like Donald Trump. Can you tell me what you like about him? Like, why is it that you like him? I'm curious. I want to know more. That's going to get somebody just as engaged as any algorithm would, because now you're asking them about themselves. You're asking them about something they care about. And you might find that if they can't give a good reason, that's your opportunity to give pushback. And I know that sounds really defeating, because this is a problem of algorithms. This is a problem of multitudes of people. This is a problem of groups. But at the end of the day, groups are made of individuals. If you sit down and you can get a handful of people to stop being harmful, that still, like, from a purely utilitarian point of view, that has still improved the world to a degree. And if we've got a lot of people doing that, then we've got the world getting better at a much faster rate. It's gonna take a long time. There's no way to avoid that reality, but it's the most we can do. Talk to people you care about. Don't let them get alienated and isolated online. Don't let them fall into these rabbit holes as best you can. But also, just as a note, recognize when you can't change their mind anymore.
Yeah,
Recognize when
definitely.
you've recognize when you've gone past that point of no return, because at that point it's a matter of your own mental health. Don't push yourself further than what you can feasibly do, if pushing yourself further is just going to cause you mental or physical harm. There are situations where having these conversations can be incredibly dangerous. It's a good idea to start getting familiarized with when those situations arise.
Hmm. Yeah. Uh, I definitely have been doing something like that with basically like being trans and all that.
Mhm.
Um, I try to. like ask people why they feel a certain way, especially if I'm like in person. Um, and it does spark a bit of a better conversation than if we were just accusing each other of whatever the other would accuse each other of.
Yeah, like
Um,
it's better to have a conversation with somebody than go, "You're a fascist." Well, you're a groomer. Well, now we're at an impasse.
yeah,
Like, where do we go from here except depression?
I will definitely say it's not for everybody. And please, absolutely stay safe. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, don't. You know, because like the last thing we need is someone uh who went a little too far, uh, like hurting other people. You know.
Yeah, I had a friend who I was doing this with for the longest time, trying to trying to get them to, give up some of their worst beliefs. And it was working to a point. Like they started, saying, "Hey, I'm starting to feel like, when I'm watching Ben Shapiro, he's just an asshole. Like I'm not seeing anything productive there anymore. I'm just seeing a guy who wants to hurt people." And when I hear stuff like that, I'm like, "Yay, that's progress. You're getting better. You're breaking out of that social media bubble." But then, later on we had a falling out where he said that he was better than me and Raz because Raz being my partner, Raz had a hysterectomy. Raz could not bear children anymore. He said his relationship was better because uh his wife could bear children, and it was that way for gay relationships as well. And that was at that point it got too personal. Like everything moved out of the hypothetical and moved into now we're talking about something that you're telling me that my partner trying to save her own life uh was a
Yeah.
bad thing because of a lineage that nobody should give a shit about. Like once you've moved into that super personal attack territory, maybe it's a good idea to abandon just for your own mental health. It's not always a physical threat. Sometimes it's just you've only got so many spoons in your day and you can't spend them getting yourself hurt.
Yeah.
So be careful as you do anything like this online or in person.
I think especially in person because they're like right there.
Yeah. But in person sometimes is also the best place to have these conversations. Like when you're, Fortnite fucker 69 on the internet with an anime PFP on Twitter, you're not a person to somebody anymore.
Right.
But when you're, Jonathan or Larry or Laura or, Magda, it doesn't matter. Wow, that's me. That's my Magic the Gathering brain kicking in. Um, Somebody was playing Mono Red Magda the other day and I was not happy about it. Um, but when you're that person, you're a name and a face and an individual and maybe even a family member. When you're that person, you are categorically more likely to get to somebody because they have a vested interest in you sticking around. It's one thing to leave the conversation on Twitter or block somebody. It feels a whole lot different when you get up and walk away.
Yeah, definitely.
Sarah says, "Well, Magda's an actual name, is it?" Yes, but the reason that my brain went to Magda was because of somebody playing mono red Magda and trying to use gold span dragon tricks on me, and I didn't appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you coming on and having this conversation with me.
No problem.
Yeah, go ahead and shout yourself out for my listeners.
Sure. So my name is Suris. I cover politics and I talk about religion and philosophy and just in general stuff that is not controversial whatsoever. No one ever has any disagreements. There's never any fights. I've never gotten any death threats. I don't have a gun specifically because of a person threatening my life last year. None of that. All of that is everything's perfectly fine. Um, but uh so if you do care about those kinds of conversations, the stuff that I was talking about in this interview, it's the stuff that I talk about on my channel all the time anyways. Like this is no different than what you would get from a general episode,
Hmm.
honestly.
Did you say where people could find you?
Oh, just go onto YouTube, type in Suris. If you want to hear me talk about video games, maybe type in Neko Suris or go to Sunset City. I've also got the name Echo Suris on Twitch if you want to see me live. There we go. Those are the locations. I forget my brain's just like it just type in Suris to the bar. It's fine. I'll be okay.
Yeah, it works most of the time. Well, I appreciate it. Yeah.
Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you so much for listening. If you liked what you heard, consider clicking like and subscribe. Also, if you have any thoughts of your own, write them down in the comments and let yourself be heard. Thanks again, and see you next Monday.